3 to 5 years ago, there were places, option one, I think, here in town. Option one would be and then they had a real market.
Delighted to see you come on a Friday afternoon. This is just marvelous. I'm Hy Fitzgerald. I'm the Associate Provost for Outreach and Engagement at Michigan State University. We have two incredibly provocative speakers for you today. And I'm not going to give them a long introduction because they're going to introduce themselves by the work they do. And we want to maximize time for you to interact with them with questions, etc. So these two individuals come to Penn State from Virginia Tech, where they received a national award called the Peter McGraw Award for their exemplary work linking universities to communities, in their case, around issues related to economic development and regional planning. So if you think of the words engagement, economic development, program development, community partnerships, you're thinking Tim and Nancy Franklin. We're delighted to have you. I guess you're going to start off.
I'm going to kick it off. So, well, thank you all for coming out this afternoon. When Bert suggested we do this on Friday afternoon, I wasn't sure whether we'd have anybody here. So, and I recognize we're between you and your weekend and maybe a happy hour, so we'll try to make it interesting. I would just start off by talking just a second about Michigan State. We spent the whole day with Hy and his outreach and engagement organization, and we just would suggest that I'm very impressed. I haven't talked to Nancy enough to speak for her, but I think pretty clearly an organization that's set up around functional responsibilities and functional areas that allows the university to interact, to bring value both for the community and the university, and organize itself around different subjects and topics and the many things that we bring as universities. So I thank Hy for his good hosting, and I congratulate Michigan State on all the good work. I would say that only one thing didn't make a lot of sense that we talked about, and that was when Rex Lamore started talking about Michigan State taking the Land-Grant Cup next weekend. And I'm new to Penn State, but I thought he was confused at that point. So anyway, we'll just disagree next Saturday, but it's good to be partnering. Just a couple things about kind of what we plan to talk about today. We're going to, I think is the write-up that Nancy put together, suggest we're going to sort of tell the story first from what we did in Virginia, sort of our engagement story per se, and then try to back away and give it a reflective view from a year being out of there and some of our thoughts about things from that perspective. I think just to give a quick background on where we were before 2000, in 2001 when we were contacted by Virginia Tech and began to make the decision and then finally decide that we would take this position. Returning Roots was freshly out, and both of us had read that, and that was very important. I'm a second generation sort of community engagement person. My father ran the Southern Illinois Community Development Institute and trained the Appalachian Center people of West Virginia, and so there's a lot of things that probably are just sort of in the bones and in the sort of DNA. So when that happened, I'd been sort of in my second career done government relations, and I had been very involved with trying to convince particularly rural legislators who were representing rural districts and how little they really valued the higher education as a sector and how hard it was to get them convinced that public investment was worthy for our institutions. And thought, well, when this Virginia Tech call came, I better think clearly about, do I really want to do something about that and create a national model, or do I want to, sort of sit on the sidelines and sort of fret about it? So we dove in, and the rest is history, as they say. I just tell one quick story. When we got there, I think one of the issues you run into in any engagement is, managing your expectations. And so we decide we're gonna go down and do this thing, and they've got all these sort of on the paper commitments for all the investments they were gonna make, not the least of which was this 93,000 square foot kind of Taj Mahal, that they had absolutely no idea what to do inside of, and no money dedicated to it. The university standing on the side saying, we aren't gonna move any money from campus into the community. It has to be all new money for us to do anything. As I joke, I got there and sort of began to really sort all this out. Nancy and I both got there. I'm thinking about my own perspective. And I saw a pink slip in our future. And so it was a recipe for a problem. And so we, much of what you'll see is really, fairly dramatic, programmatic types of both thinking, design, and implementation around that idea that we've got a community that's expecting this building and its partnership with Virginia Tech that we represented to transform what was a very, agriculture, basic industrial economy into an innovation economy. And so some of the thinking you're going to see is really around, the middle of the night stuff where you realize, in a sense, I used to use this analogy, and for those of you who have any kind of athletic background, you'll understand that we had already failed, and that in a sense, I was playing home run derbies, because if I didn't hit home runs, we were already out. And those of you who watch the All-Star game, you get a certain number of swings, and either you hit a home run, you score, or any swing that you don't hit it out is an out. So I don't know if you want to
Sure.
introduce yourself.
Yes. Thank you all very much for having us today and hosting us. Michigan State is known nationally as within the engagement community as a leader, and it was wonderful to be able to come today and learn more firsthand behind the scenes what we'd heard about in bits and pieces over several years and in many different venues. One of the opportunities that I had to learn more about Michigan State before coming here was last year in conjunction with my dissertation research. Some conversations with Hy really helped me to appreciate more really the scholarly aspect of how you approach engagement. I was very intrigued with that. So thank you very much for having us here today. As Tim said, we're going to start our session with sort of the on-the-ground story of what happened in our experience in Virginia, and really we see this as a little bit different than many of the conversations around engagement, which are really coming more from a university perspective. This is really coming more from a regional perspective. What was the situation like on the ground, and what were the challenges, and trying to address that as community as university connected people. And then we're going to widen the lens after that, and Tim's going to really talk to some of the economic policy that we argued in order to get funding for the project, so you can sort of see how some of those connections were made. And then I'll finish out by talking to you a little bit from my dissertation research findings and how, looking across institutions involved in regional engagement, we might begin to think in a few perhaps new ways about that. So, Tim?
Great. Well, we're going to start by kind of giving the case, but I'll tell you three dynamics that I think are probably the most pressing dynamics in the economy, all sort of speak to the university's role in some way, in an important way, because we essentially had a university saying it wanted to rethink its 21st century land grant mission in this project, and we had this community that was extremely anxious about its economic future. And so those three dynamics, though, I would just say at the beginning, because a lot of what you're going to see for the rest kind of all revolve around this sort of set of things, and that's really talent, technology, and then the third is sort of the choice of a place to live. And I think the reason that those are important to point out is it really does, at least as a construct for defining the problem, it really calls into being the full breadth of our institutions. We do those things very well, and you'll see that we point that out as we go along here. So let's start off with Alice. Well, in our country, said Alice, still panting a little, you generally get to somewhere else. If you ran very fast for a long time, as we've been doing, a slow sort of country, said the Queen. Now here, you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. If you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast as that. And I think for many of our communities, that's the way it is, and for Southside, it might have been more than that. Tobacco, textiles, furniture was the base. Really neck down manufacturing completely. High unemployment when we were there. Big earnings gap with divergent kind of patterns with the rest of the state in terms of earnings. We had very low levels of college attainment. Thought about it as a learning center first, and thought, you know, we were going to teach graduate education. I didn't see a very big market for graduate education. It's almost 40% without a high school degree, 20% never entered ninth grade. If you look at the demographics of where the 25 to 44-year-olds were moving from and to, if you don't know Virginia very well, those northern counties are very affluent. There's kind of a, they call it the Fertile Crescent, which is sort of the eastern, northeastern sort of borders of the state. So those were doing very well. We were in Danville, Pennsylvania County, Blacksburg's over here, and so about 125 miles away, and this core demographic, 25 to 44-year-olds, were moving out. There was a strong agricultural history, tobacco, and lots of suitable fields and greenhouses. There was a polymers cluster, probably was a concentration more than a cluster, but very commodity focused, regional branch manufacturing facilities. There was a racetrack in it that was being redesigned, a road course that was of great interest to our mechanical engineers, and later termed the Nürburgring Ring of North America. So it had some very interesting things to mechanical engineers. The natural resources were the Dan River, the Piedmont section of Virginia. The architectural assets of the community had been preserved. It was a beautiful community. They didn't do very many movies there, but they had a lot of antebellum architecture and some very wealth that was on display from 100 years ago. The local governments were activated. There was a local private citizenship group that was very activated, and the Research Triangle Park and North Carolina Triad were both within about an hour's drive. So there's about 2 million people south of us, and 2 to 3 hours, 6 Research One institutions, UVA, Virginia Tech, Wake, and NC State, North Carolina, and Duke. The university's primary interests were in being a top 20 or 30 research institution. They wanted to establish a new research institute on campus, the Virginia Bioinformatics Institute. They swapped about $13 million from the Tobacco Commission, which was nested in that area in the south central part, for the commitment to lead on the Institute for Advanced Learning. And they were very interested in building the research infrastructure, the whole issue of public higher education's relevancy in Virginia was true there. And then I mentioned earlier the reinvention of the land grant mission. And so we'll show you the video, kind of fast forward you into what happened. Let's see if I can get this to...
This is a great experience.
I love it here. The people are fantastic.
Very excited about it.
It's all about computers and stuff.
And I came here and I was like, wow.
The story of the resurgence of Southside Virginia
is more of an anthology, a collection of stories from a collection of people across the region. Students, teachers, employers, workers, and scientists, all with a goal of turning around the region's economy and its outlook. Southside Virginia stretches from the Blue Ridge Mountains to the coastal plain along the Carolina border, an intersection of economics and geography in which tobacco and textiles reigned for centuries. But while the rolling Piedmont hills remained, time and technology wore down the economy, and the jobs, and the people, and, to a degree, the hope went away. Unemployment ran into double figures. A third of adults lacked a high school diploma. Recognizing that the region's reliance on tobacco and textiles no longer worked, a coalition of Southside's business leaders approached Virginia Tech for help. And Tech answered, creating and implementing a new model for engagement. The Institute for Advanced Learning and Research quickly became a visual and symbolic center that would spur the reversal of the region's economic and social fortunes through technology and research and education. Located in Danville, the Institute's reach extends across the region. 30 miles to the west, for example, in Martinsville, Applied Felts has used the Institute's polymer research facilities to improve its product and its competitiveness.
I've used the polymer division of the Institute to help me in characterizing heat signatures for welding our products together. This has enabled me to increase my quality control and efficiency in the manufacturing process.
20 miles in the other direction, Tech's Virginia Institute for Performance Engineering and Research, VIPER, has married research to racing at the Virginia International Raceway, attracting growing businesses in a growing sport.
The development that we're doing here is not only attracting businesses to come in, we're creating jobs, employing people here at our facility, but also the companies that will be moving in will be creating jobs for the people that they'll need to staff their facilities.
VIPER focuses on research beneficial to a long-standing tradition in Southside, motorsports, and the IALR's Institute for Sustainable and Renewable Resources focuses on another, agriculture. From switchgrass for biofuels to strawberries to orchids, researchers are finding ways to produce high-value crops that preserve the region's agricultural traditions and its farms.
You know, this area does have a very rich agricultural heritage, so we want to make sure that we can keep certainly farmers in the game. You know, if they're not doing as much tobacco farming as they used to, you know, we can certainly develop other products that could be grown here. You know, whether or not, well, the one goal we have to work on is trying to make them economically viable.
But the Institute is even more focused on the region's greatest resource, its people. And since its opening in 2003, thousands of Southside Virginians have passed through Institute programs designed to educate, train, and prepare them for a better future. From Halifax County sophomore Ashley Powell learning the software that will one day help her teach better, to Felicia Myers looking to quit the textile mill before the mill quit her.
And I came here to the Institute for Learning and Research, and I was like, wow. Went back, got my high school diploma, graduated, cap and gowns. Then I went to, and that persuaded me to go to college, to DCC.
From an elementary school librarian getting computer training to stay a step ahead of her students, to a Hargrave Military Institute science teacher interning in the Institute's Polymer Research Lab.
This is a great experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything, and I would strongly encourage those other teachers to spend some of their summer coming on in and getting refreshed, re-energized. And again, this whole idea of the things I do this summer really, I think, make me a much better teacher in the fall.
From technology workers able to stay in the region because they can get the training they need, to the managers of the firms that need those workers.
The Institute was instrumental in EIT's decision to locate in Danville proper. I was tasked to look all over the region, North Carolina, South Carolina, Central Virginia, The fact that I had already lived here was kind of a plus, but it really wasn't the impetus. The decision grew out of the Institute and the community's commitment to technology.
Through the Institute, Virginia Tech has applied its traditional land-grant values to promote a new economy to one of Virginia's most distressed regions. It has brought in new industry and helped existing industry expand its knowledge and its workforce. It has helped to create hundreds of jobs, and it has educated thousands of Virginians, from first graders to their teachers, from assembly line workers to Ph.D.s. And a region that had been on the decline is now on the rise.
Virginia Tech's role in really kind of planting that seed in the community has been part of a real turnaround for the Danville economy.
What we'll create is intellectual capital that will be exploited across Virginia and around the world. And that tie-in with Virginia Tech allows Virginia Tech to continue to utilize its land grant mission with a region of the state that needs that assistance.
The ability to change the dynamics almost overnight of an entire region. The research that's going on there will change the quality of life, not only for our area, but Virginia and the world. And working with Tech has been a godsend for us. The past is a pace that's nice to look at from a rearview mirror, but it's not our future.
Okay, so what we're going to do is to take you a little bit behind the scenes before we get into the broader picture. You got a feel from the video about what we did, and essentially the mission of the Institute for Advanced Learning and Research, which was the hub of the transformation activity in the region, was to attract and develop technology and talent. So it was really about bringing from without to the region, and also developing from within. And we really thought about this in 4 different domains. One was focused on fostering the development of a new economic base in the region. Second was attracting and developing an innovation economy workforce. Third was preparing the region to leverage leading edge information technology. And fourth was promoting Southside Virginia as a destination location. And for those of you not as familiar with Virginia, when Tim had the map of Virginia up, he showed you where Danville was, which was the hub of Southside. And the service region that the Institute was intended to directly serve was a 6-county region that really surrounded Danville. Now, we sat right on the Virginia border of North Carolina, and if you look demographically at the issues, the history, the challenges in North Carolina along that border, you'd find that they were very identical really to the Virginia side of the line. So that the broader region, regional impact was beyond the line. So just very briefly, how did these strategies, university-led strategies, foster the development of a new economic base? Well, one was we targeted particular industry sectors. Tim showed you the assets that were in the region to start with. And so really these industry sectors were targeted based on what were the existing assets in the region that could be built from. Polymers, motorsports, and unmanned systems, horticulture, the agricultural base, information technology, and nanomaterials. So to that end, Virginia Tech brought research and created research and development centers that were based at the Institute for Advanced Learning and Research in Danville. One of these centers, API, was focused on the polymer sector. ISRR was focused on the agricultural sector, high-value horticulture and forestry. And then Virginia Tech Mechanical Engineering was really focused around performance engineering, robotics or unmanned systems, and road characterization. Each of these research centers had commercial ventures associated with it. So you can see here Viper, Jouster, ISRR, and API all were designed to service external entities. So small and medium-sized businesses could develop contracts with the Institute to have different kinds of services provided. In addition, faculty members who needed time on highly specialized equipment could get that time on the equipment. So it was a way to generate some revenue as well as have very high value assets for research. In addition, there was a technology commercialization focus, which was really looking at growing new businesses in the region. And this was started through an EDA, Economic Development Administration grant, which provided market research expertise, capital access expertise, and commercialization expertise to entrepreneurs in the region. Then moving to the second circle, which was really focused on the people of the region. One of the core areas of focus was educational attainment. And in this vein, rather than trying to be all things to all people, we really focused our educational programming initially around programs that related directly to these economic sectors. And these were seamless programs working with high schools, partnering to community college, partnering to four-year degrees, and then into graduate degree programs, so people could follow a pathway to pursue degree attainment in any one of these areas. On top of that, we also focused on a broad array of outreach programs, recognizing that many people really weren't even ready to participate at the degree completion level. We worked to build capacity in STEM areas, science, technology, engineering, and math, among kids, among teachers, among workers who had been displaced from their jobs in the community. Moving to the third circle, which was really leveraging leading edge information technology in the region. There was a strong sense that this region was not going to be able to be competitive in a global economy if it didn't have high-speed connectivity to the rest of the world. So there was a big effort to develop a fiber optic infrastructure in the region. And the map in the lower right-hand corner with the orange lines gives you a sense the infrastructure that was put in place, about 500 miles, or 700 miles, I'm sorry, of fiber optic infrastructure. And this was funded primarily through the Tobacco Commission and provided the opportunity for carriers to be able to serve endpoints in the region because this backbone was already in place. And then finally, promoting Southside Virginia as a destination location was accomplished through a variety of efforts. One was this building that you've seen bits and pieces of had a conference center type capability in it, so we could host groups in the region that the region had never been able to host in the past. We also had a lot of business related traffic coming to contract with our research and development center, so they were introduced to the region. A lot of community beautification efforts to, again, create this region as a destination location, and a lot of work with community leaders in developing a pipeline of leadership, and particularly targeting the minority community. So that was a very quick run-through of the Virginia project, and I think now what we want to do is sort of take you up to a broader level and talk about some of the arguments that we made to use this approach. Tim?
I do. It was about 6.5 years in development, about $80 million invested. The last year we were there, we had about $6.3 million base operating budget from the state. Probably about $19 million when you looked at all the funds that were going through the last year we were there. We had a federal appropriator who earmarked a fair amount, so that was very helpful in building those revenues up on that Tobacco Commission as well. But I think part of what I would just suggest would be valuable about that is if you're trying to start with limited resources, even though those are a lot of resources, you know, and with this huge goal of transforming an economy by the university's presence, which programs do you do and how do you, you can't do everything or else you spread yourself out too far. So let's talk a little bit about some of the rationale that we use. And I'm going to use some Pennsylvania maps because they're fancier than my old Virginia maps, but the same things are true in North Carolina and Virginia as they are in Pennsylvania. And I think the points probably, Rex and John were giving us some of the same kinds of reads on Michigan before we started. So just looking at the ecology, the innovation economy, and I would share this with you much because I think to some degree, if you were looking in terms, we did this technology development around the research, we did the talent development, we did community development, we really did a lot of things around policy that connected this region to other networks. And this is some of the reasons why we did it. Obviously, regions are very important. I think it's a key economic development concept. I don't think that's much argument around that. But I think the clustering for us became very important because clusters happen in regions, and they gave us an organizing principle around the new programs. I made the point at the bottom when I started. This is a good concept about why innovation matters. Much of the work, the routine work done by people is moving offshore or being done by machines, and the creative work is what remains. Most of the wealth that we have is because we have been so involved as a country in the innovation process, and that's very important to keep here as a percentage of what our economic growth has been. Technological advances are now very dominant in terms of growth, which is different than 50 to 100 years ago. Talent is very important and the keystone to competitiveness. And so the reason talent's important is because when you start looking at where discretionary income is in different sectors, the growth in jobs has been largely around the creative class jobs. That's where the discretionary income is. There's been a decline or an increase in the service sector. I'm not an economist, but I think service sector follows the creative class around. They're hard to distinguish the two because the discretionary income allows you to buy the services, and so the restaurants and dry cleaners and movie houses and those kind of jobs are all near where these are, and what you see in a lot of the places like Southside are the labor sector is in decline, so there's a big loss of jobs, big decline in the kind of wages that manufacturing provided. So as you look at some of the trends, instead of industrial recruiting or cost competition, you're really into regional competitiveness, and some of the things that we obviously argued for, Mark Dragenstadt has highlighted in this slide. Innovation means science and technology. The U.S., in terms of its competitiveness in science and technology, there's been several important reports raising concern around that. When we were thinking about transforming an economy, this was a very important factoid that we got out of, I think, the best report, but 5% of the U.S. total graduates come out of science and engineering areas, and those 5% have accounted for 50% of the economic growth in the last 50 years. And so, when you start thinking about which degrees you're going to try to offer into a region like that, all degrees aren't equal. We wanted to offer degrees that were more in the primary economy, base economy. Obviously, U.S. emphasis on science and engineering falls behind others. My background was in government relations, and one of the things that I think is important to recognize is that much of what universities produce into regional economies happens within a commuting distance. And as I've said in other formats, it's not that universities aren't an important economic factor, we just aren't an important economic factor in more than 50% of the voting districts in the legislature. And so at a time when we have less questions about being economically important, you have less public money going into universities, and I don't think it has to do with the fact that we aren't valuable. We just aren't valuable in enough places. And obviously there are good empirical evidence about how universities affect that. Well, one of the issues in I think our general politic, although there's certainly a lot of optimism after last Tuesday, a week ago Tuesday, but as you look at mega regions, and I think these little, by the way, any of these little cul-de-sacs that are kind of corridors or regions, you start thinking about regional economies, that's what we're really talking about. And you can see they kind of grow together. In Penn State, where Penn State sits right in between, in the T, which is, get the star out of there, that part of Pennsylvania where you really don't have either of the two mega regions, but, and I don't know the exact facts, but something like 85% of the U.S. economy in the next several years is supposed to happen in these regions, and so there's a lot of haves and have-nots, and so some of the issue in terms of being proactive about building economies in places where they're not very strong right now is what would you do to help build a corridor or a region where there is one. And if you think about that, a lot of it has to do with talent stickiness and what do people who are talented. We had a lot of companies that were thinking about Southside who would say, no, we're not going to come there. And one of the reasons there aren't any people like us there. There weren't any careers for professional couples. The days of IBM moving people around and the trailing spouse not having anything to do. Rural regions have tremendous issues with keeping doctors because the spouse doesn't have any employment unless they're both doctors. And then the cultures are problematic. And when you look at, be interested to see if this works. I don't think it's that important. But when you look at Pennsylvania over from 1990 and you scroll through to 2012, and you just look at the 25 to 44-year-old population, we're losing our core demographic, and I would bet Michigan's having the same thing. So talent stickiness is really a big problem. I'm going to skip that one. When you start looking at talent and where it aggregates, and Rex has these, so you may have seen some of that, at least in Pennsylvania. It's aggregating kind of in the around State College in the middle there, and Pittsburgh in the west, and Philadelphia in the east. Not surprisingly, income is highly correlated with that. And then when you look at poverty, it's inversely correlated with those areas. And so there's this, really dominant trend with where people choose to live who have college degrees are the regions where there's good jobs and the economy grows. And you start looking at what I call the innovation infrastructure, which is where college and universities are located. And you can see they, I don't think there's a cause and effect here, but they certainly ground, and there's a historical effect that has caused those people to choose to live where there's a lot of industries. If you now layer on R&D expenditures on top of that, you start seeing that some of the bigger the circle, you got Pitt and Carnegie Mellon out here. State College has Hershey Medical School and University Park campus, University of Pennsylvania Temple in the east, and you put a 45-minute commute around it. And now when you look at where those people have lived, you're basically explaining most of the higher density regions with talent. So universities are really anchoring kind of this creative climate. It's spilling out all these benefits, and those are differentially being felt. By the way, I have these maps that sequence through, but I think when you put it on the stick, it loses the programming. So part of what you see if you looked at those would be back in these regions. If you start to look at the population growth between 1990 and 2012, all the density's happening in the area, and that's a surrogate for job growth, which is really what's causing some of these politics I mentioned. So my job is in economic and workforce development, so when you start thinking about how do we make public efforts to do things, and what do we spend our effort on? Well, you look back to Southside, all the existing companies that we could have worked on or assessed to see what kind of workforce they needed, most of those jobs went away within 5 years. So all the effort we would have made would have been into a dying industry sector. Part of the problem that we ran into with the workforce efforts was that if we educated people for jobs that weren't in the region, it would just accelerate brain drain because they would now be having to leave the region, and you couldn't nail those new degrees down long enough to bring the jobs to them. And then obviously community work was hard to make happen when you didn't have any economic hope or any leadership base to work around. So we really began to really see what you saw earlier as being integrated, because we needed to address all these kind of things at once. We needed to create new job base for people. We needed to have the talent to fill those jobs, and we needed to have a community effort that would make people want to be in the community. And so a lot of what happens is you get this downward spiral, and the have-nots really don't have anything that allows them to build from. And so universities can provide some of those things. The market conditions work against self-correction because the talent's migrating elsewhere, the infrastructure's going elsewhere, the companies and the jobs are following the talent, and so you have wealth elsewhere. And so you have that dynamic that the maps that I described and didn't show you would have shown you, which is we become a metro nation, and we built all that. And so one of the big questions I think is, either let the rural regions die, we continue to have high tension between the different cultures, or is there a public remedy that you could begin to suggest that would perhaps reverse some of those activities? And our solution was engage a research university because it's a highly credible public asset. We're excellent in talent development. We, as the maps show, we attract talent to where there is. We provide a sense that there's movement, hope in a community. Obviously, we do research and technologies. We know technology infrastructure, and we have people who work for us who buy quality of life things and advocate for good schools and values that are consistent. Jump in to sort of explain the model from a cluster standpoint. Much of what you had with the Institute as sort of this new hybrid kind of institution was we were taken in the Massachusetts the life sciences cluster. You basically have the teaching and specialized hospitals as sort of the core asset. The core asset in Southside was that racetrack and the polymers firms. But the Institute became the cluster organization. We were kind of the catalyst. Those commercial services, commercial ventures, I think was the title. We provided, services to industry, and we, in doing that, created an interaction point between our faculty and the industry. By the way, there were professionals running that, not the faculty running those services. Obviously, we established 4 primary foci with regard to research, so we took research and put it in another community. We had funded over 20 FTE of university faculty for research that we were distributing. Then obviously we had the educational pieces that went with it. And so in that way, trying to strengthen clusters or initiate clusters in a region by having this, in a sense, sort of a nutshell of a Research 1, 125 miles from campus. And so our roles were, in economic, talent, leadership and policy, and community. And the university really becomes not only there's this concept of an innovation supply chain, and the universities really connect, global companies, original equipment manufacturers with small and medium-sized companies. But we also are sort of, if you think about all the things about technology development, the apex of the talent development activity really happens many times on our major campuses. And so if you can move doctoral education off campus into labs, you can have that one graduate student turn down 7 of the best engineering programs in the country, Berkeley, Michigan, Penn State, and others, to study at Virginia Tech in Southside because of the facilities we put up. That, you know, it's not the talent that, I mean, it's not the technology that trades at the tech transfer process. Most of the values for companies happen in the talent exchange process. So if you move that talent down into a rural area, you create an opportunity for an exchange point of value, and we were when we solidified, Goodyear reinvested about $75 million, Corning 13 million, that was sort of 2,300 jobs in one case, a couple hundred in another case. Dodge Motorsports R&D was, they've been fiddling around for about a year now, but trying to move in. What they're after is that high-end talent, but they're bringing jobs, and in a way we're bringing those clusters back into those areas. I'm not going to speak too much to these. These were, I gave a presentation about a week ago, and they were really to try to give to a community some ideas about how do you go about doing this, because the value, I think, was very high for the university. Our departments were pleased. We had new research money. We had a broader competitive research infrastructure. We had new graduate assistantships. We had new FTEs of research faculty. We were able to create value in that regard. And so I was trying to show people, you know, what's your core concept? We always started with kind of a core facility. In some cases it was NASA Langley. In other cases it was DOD and others. But, you know, what's the principal investigator want? What's the federal lab need? You know, what's the private R&D lab? And how can you get those vectors going the same way so you can create a value system in a new place that is going to be useful? Because you don't want to spend all this money and create something that's not sustainable and doesn't have intrinsic rewards for the enterprises that are involved. Some of the benefits of research-led economic development, you know, the spillover in firm starts, talent, and technology into the region where you put the resources. There was place-based expertise, not unlike this facility, but it was a way for the community found a new front door to Virginia Tech, a much less intimidating front door. We became an outsourced R&D capacity for small and medium-sized enterprises, which allowed them to not have to have a research costs that go with that. There was tech transfer, bright graduate students, and a creative climate. The region announced 6,000 jobs during the period between when the roof went on and when Nancy and I stopped counting. And I think those 6,000 jobs, most of them didn't have to do with the Institute. Most of them had to do with those companies coming to a community that we were a symbol that this was a community that was going somewhere and had some good leadership. So some of the benefits, I can leave these, but I think it gets to be a compelling story. The community gets it. They get connections to value networks. There were a lot, had hundreds of companies coming to the community to visit and see what we were doing, and it really was an effort to strengthen the primary economy. And so I'm going to stop. We've got some rules of engagement that I think are important, but I want to give Nancy a chance to speak to some of her models. Okay?
So I guess the question in my mind was, is regional engagement an idea whose time has come? Because when you begin to look at what are the primary challenges, economic and social challenges of regions in this new economy, this innovation-based economy, they map very closely to some of the great strengths of research universities. So it seems as though there should be a good way to do some matchmaking there. And in fact, there are an increasing number of reports that have come out. A couple of these are European-based reports. Others but others are domestic, but all of these have been published just since 2006, if I'm not mistaken. So this is a fairly new but important trend, I think, that we're seeing develop, that there's a lot of interest in how do we have universities engage effectively with regions around regional development. And I wish I could tell you that when we were in Virginia, that we had a very rational plan and we just started at the top and began executing A through Z, but in fact that really wasn't the case. There had been some thinking before we came, but mostly it was a process of experimentation, plenty of failure along with the success as we went down different paths, and we didn't have a lot of roadmaps to guide us. And so when I was working on my dissertation last year, I really wanted to use my dissertation research as an opportunity to look at how other land-grant universities were approaching this regional engagement issue, particularly looking at the economic development aspect of that. So what I particularly focused on was engagement that addressed complex issues over an extended period of time and where there were multiple players across many different university departments involved. So this is different than more what I call the entrepreneurial model of engagement, where it's a single faculty member working on a single community project, but much more an institutional level engagement activity. And essentially what I found from my work, and I focused on 6 land-grant institutions: Virginia Tech, Michigan State, Purdue, University of Georgia, University of Missouri, and University of Minnesota. And what I found looking across all of those was that in each case there were assets and needs in the region and assets and needs in the university. And there was a crosswalking that was able to occur. So the university had assets, typically intellectual expertise, that lent itself to regional needs. But the university also has needs, needs from a land-grant mission perspective, needs for public recognition and appreciation, increased funding, and so forth, and regional assets can play to that. What was an important component in the picture were the people who were the connectors, and on the regional side, I labeled these regional stewards because of a concept that I found in some of the literature. People who are of a place, who are very committed to the long-term well-being of that place, and they are essentially the leaders, if not the elected leaders, the selected leaders of a place. And they were typically the ones that we needed to find, or the institutions in my study needed to find in order to partner effectively. On the university side, we needed not just somebody who was enthusiastic about engagement, but someone at the university level who could be a leader across these multiple departments, who could really connect the institution over a long period of time, multiple people and departments, to the region. Another critical ingredient was what I call the partnership policy structure, which really constituted the policies that sustained these partnerships over time. These were agreements between the region and the university about how to set goals, how to measure those goals, and provide accountability to stakeholders, about resourcing the project, where was the money going to come from, and who was going to take responsibility for finding that money and bringing it in to the partnership. And then governance of the partnership, how were people going to hold each other responsible for the various roles that were involved. And then I also found that there could be accelerators of engagement, and this is where you really have external resources that are increasing the asset base for the partnership. And essentially these external resources create new assets in the region, and by having these new assets in the region, the needs of the region and the university can be met more effectively, which brings more money into the region and allows even more needs to be met. So it was really sort of an upward spiral of engagement and activity. A second thing that I focused on is looking at first wave and second wave engagement. earlier, Arbo and Benenworth, which was a study commissioned by the OECD. They talked about engagement in two flavors. One, first wave engagement, which is more transaction-oriented engagement. Essentially, regions are looking for universities to provide expertise on a particular topic or on several particular topics. In second wave engagement, we're really looking at an effect where the university works with the region to bring external resources into the partnership, and those combine with additional resources and really can create this sort of local buzz in the community and essentially over time transform the region, because people think something's going on. We've had this experience at Southside. These businesses would come, they think something was going on, and the buzz in and of itself begins to create the reality of something really going on. So what I wanted to do was to take this first wave and second wave concept and try to break it down and look at how would we think about characteristics of engagement relating to first wave versus second wave, so that we could get a sense for how to focus our efforts. And so this is probably part of what Hai was referring to when he talked about the provocative presentation, and this I sort of put up there for people to take shots at, but I've got 5 charts here. This one is really the approach to engagement. And just to highlight a couple of things here, essentially first wave engagement is looking at what is the current situation. How do we catch this region up? Typically through strategies that are NAS program related strategies. In second wave engagement, conversely, what we're really looking at is a desired state of being for that region and a leapfrog effect. How do we create competitive advantage in the region? Not just catch up to other places, but how do we really create competitive advantage in that region? And typically that would involve more customized intervention strategies. This chart looks at roles and relationships, community versus university, and what are the differences between first and second wave. And what I found was that in first wave engagement, we find that the community tends to be more the facilitator, the university is more a driver. The second wave engagement, we in the university sector are more facilitators and the community is more the driver. So the needs are really coming from the community. The scope of this is also different. First wave engagement tends to be contained to just the original players, who was involved from the university, who was involved in the community, where second wave engagement is really focusing on this partnering infrastructure. So you're really creating something that stays in place over time that connects the university to the community and allows different people to move in and out of that partnership. This chart looks at research. What does research look like in first wave engagement? Well, it's typically driven by faculty interest. The funding comes on campus. Some of it may or may not reach the community itself. We see a lot of focus on social science disciplines and a primary outcome goal of scholarship and publications. Conversely, in second wave engagement, we see engagement that's driven more by regional opportunity and money coming mostly into the region, some going back to campus, but a lot of money coming into the region itself. We see a lot of engineering and hard science disciplines because they're working on creating this new economic base and new regional assets being created as a result of the partnership. That's not to say that scholarship and publications don't occur as well, but just that that's not the end game. The end game is really creating new regional assets. This chart's really looking at education implications, the role of undergraduates or our undergraduates on campus in their first wave experience. They're learning about regional engagement through the eyes and the experiences of their faculty members. Whereas in second wave engagement, the students themselves are actively involved in applying what they've learned in the classroom to a problem or multiple problems in a region. Within the region itself, in first wave engagement, we're focused more on skill certification, targeting existing employer base. Second wave engagement is looking much more at post-secondary certification and particularly looking at these what we call high-need, low-demand programs, where there's a high need for engineering and science disciplines, that 5% that Tim talked about in his one chart, and how do we bring those programs to a region. And this last chart is really looking at public service implications. In first wave engagement, the university players tend to be more the typical university outreach units doing the service. In second wave engagement, we see other departments of the university being involved, whether that's information technology, it could be, we had architect's office, people who have different kinds of expertise in the university who may not be faculty, but can bring that to bear in a regional context. The infrastructure is more on sort of high-speed communications rather than water and sewer lines, and really looking at public service as part of a holistic engagement portfolio, not as something that's generating revenue in and of itself back to campus as a reason for being. And so in the end, what I found is that we really can create this what I call the virtuous circle of engagement, transformative regional engagement, where we have all these different factors in play, and what we find is that there are benefits that spin out to the region, benefits that spin out to the university, and benefits that spin out to the state at large. And so part of what I got into, and not this afternoon, is policy implications of this for public policy. How can public policy be more effectively structured to incentivize university engagement at a regional level? So just to finish here with a quote from Arvo and Benenworth, in that sense, higher education institutions find themselves as something of a crossroads. They are spaces through which global, national, and local actors pass in seeking to realize their goals. Universities are often large strategic actors with the opportunities to build linkages between these different actors, their intentions, and resources. And this places universities at a crossroads, raising the question of how they will consolidate this situation. That's it, and we would love to entertain questions, discussion, conversation with you.